to the podcast of the Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. JABA is a psychology journal that publishes research about applications of the experimental analysis of behavior to problems of social importance. In this episode, I'll be talking to Dr. Claudia Dozier at the University of Kansas. Dr. Dozier, along with her co-authors Jessica Juanico, Stephen Payne, Julie Ackerlund Brandt, and Erica Jowett Hirst, published a paper titled An Evaluation of Toy Quality for Increasing Self-Control in Typically Developing Preschool Children that will appear in the fall 2016 issue of JABA. Dr. Dozier has agreed to take some time to talk to us about the research described in that paper. Dr. Dozier, first, thank you for agreeing to talk with me for this podcast. I know I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you are.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. I'm definitely happy to be here.
Excellent. So first, and maybe most obviously, what led you to study self-control?
Well, I think given my background in the assessment and treatment of problem behavior, we often encounter individuals who have a difficult time waiting for things that they want. So I've always been interested in research on this particular topic for clinical application, but I think the main impetus for our particular studies that we've done in this area came out of the fact that I found myself in a relatively new position as faculty at KU, and my graduate students and I were lucky enough to be able to work in the Child Development Center at KU with typically developing preschool children. And what we noticed or observed on many occasions is that many of those kids also had a very difficult time waiting for things that they wanted, and sometimes engaged in disruptive behavior when reinforcers were delayed or denied. So I think my group decided it would behoove us to start reading on this topic and figuring out some ways to work with our kids. And I think those are the combination of things that sort of led us to becoming interested in doing research in that area.
Okay, that certainly makes sense. Like many readers, I'm sure, I found myself thinking about the famous Walter Mischel marshmallow experiments while reading your paper. You cite, but you don't discuss that research in your paper, however. Do you see any useful similarities between the two research lines?
Absolutely. I think in the Mischel studies and in our study, what we're looking to do is see whether providing toys or activities during delay periods would enhance self-control. And we found results that were similar to the Mischel 1972 paper, for example, that in fact they do. Providing toys during delay periods increases waiting or choosing to wait. In our case, with respect to our setup. I think the Mischel results were also similar to our results in a previous study by my graduate student, Matt Newquist. That is, the procedures that he evaluated that involved calling attention to the preferred item or having to wait for the preferred item, such as a brief rule, when I wait, I get what I want, or a countdown timer that signaled how long I have left to wait until the reinforcer was delivered, was not as effective as procedures that distracted or may have competed with attending to the preferred and delayed stimulus. And so we found some similar results in Matt's study that Mischel found. I think it's also interesting that this notion, if I remember correctly, was also proposed by Skinner and Walden too. So he described children learning to control themselves. I think the example, it's been a while since I read it, but it was the lollipop around the neck or the forbidden bowl of soup. And what he suggested is removing items out of sight or not thinking about those items may result in better self-control. And he actually suggested for small children engaging in overt or covert activities that prevented one from attending to the forbidden or delayed items, things like distracting games or other activities for young kids.
Definitely, that Walden 2 reference is a good one. I know I always find that when I think I've read something new or thought of something new, if you go back, Skinner probably thought of it way before.
He said it, yeah, absolutely the case.
Okay, before getting into the study itself and what you found, it seems reasonable to have you start by providing us an overview of what you did. So this study actually is a follow-up to a study you published in 2012 that you just mentioned. So can you also explain the relationship between the two studies?
Sure. So my previous master's student, like I said, Matt Newquist, and colleagues compared various procedures that have been shown to increase self-control in varying degrees, but he did so within the context of a fixed delay period, a 5-minute delay for young kids. And these procedures were a brief rule, a countdown timer during the delay, and access to high preferred toys during the delay. And he measured self-control responding by determining the number of 5 trials in a session in which the participant chose a large delayed reinforcer. It was 4 edibles in this case, versus a small immediate reinforcer, which was the same edible, but it was a different magnitude, just 1. And what he found in his study is that toys during the delay was the only procedure that was effective for increasing self-control. So what my graduate student, Jessica Juanico, did is replicated and extended the Nuquist study by addressing some of the limitations of that study. So the major extension was to compare the influence of preference of the toys or items that were provided during the delay for promoting self-control. So she was looking at, do you get similar effects when items are low preferred, moderate preferred, and high preferred? She also attempted to control for a limitation of the study and by providing toys for both the small and large reinforcer choices, which we didn't do in the Nuquist study, which may have been problematic in that the participant may have been choosing the larger delayed reinforcer because of a potential magnitude effect. They got both the toys and the edibles. So Jessica attempted to control for that by at least initially providing the items for all reinforcer choices.
All right, excellent, thank you. Going back to that marshmallow theme, what made you choose your specific protocol rather than, say, using the famous marshmallow protocol?
Right. I think this is a great question, and to be honest, we went back and forth on the procedure. I can't tell you how many times. I really liked the setup of the Michelle studies, particularly the measurement of the duration of time waiting before switching to the less preferred, more immediate reinforcer. But there are a couple of things that we kept on coming back to that we thought were problematic in that setup. So first, we wanted to make sure to control for some of the variables in that setup that may have been potential compounds. So one is gaining access to the experimenter and other toys once the experimenter came back in the room, which might have influenced how long participants waited. So there was a behavior that the participant would engage in, the experimenter would come back into the room and then deliver the less preferred items, but they also, the compound there is the experimenter came back in the room and they also played with other toys. So the other thing we wanted to control for was the rewards used in the choice options. We wanted to make sure that they were the same across the choice options. So in our study, it was the same edibles, they were just of different magnitude. And then obviously we wanted to get repeated measures within individual subjects within and across sessions to see if we could get stability in responding within subject and see if we got any differences. But back to that measurement and setup that Michelle used, we really did struggle with whether we should use this or another setup. And I think the major reason we didn't adopt that procedure in which the participant could wait as long as they could and then switch to the less preferred but more immediate reinforcer, the issue here we saw is that it's possible that the opportunity to get the less preferred reward at any time might have influenced children's responding. So I'll play with this slinky until I'm done with it, but I always know that the less preferred reward is there whenever I want it. So we thought that just the mere opportunity of being able to get the less preferred but more immediate reward whenever might have influenced responding. So we ended up going with a setup that we thought was more conservative and similar to a setup by other researchers that have done research on self-control, like Meath and colleagues and Dixon and colleagues, where the individual on a trial chose the smaller immediate versus larger delayed reinforcer, 5 trials within a session, and then experience the particular contingencies in the various sessions that were associated with the different choice options. So essentially they were making a commitment response. And at the end of the day, whether what we decided to do was the best choice, I think, is still open for debate. And I think there are pros and cons of each of the procedures.
Yeah, that makes good sense, and I think that's really useful information and of the kind that you don't get in a manuscript because you can't explain all of that.
Absolutely.
So, excellent. Were there any particular or even particularly interesting problems that you encountered working with the children and asking them to choose the way that you did?
We hypothesized that we would get way more many problems, but we really did not get many. A couple of things to mention. I think we thought we would have more no reinforcer choice selections initially. So this was the control option in the concurrent operance arrangement. But I think given the rules and the various other FDs we used, the contingencies and interventions I think were pretty clear to the participants. And this was probably the case because the participants' receptive skills were pretty good. They could follow several step rules and follow relevant instructions. So we saw responding away from that no reinforcer choice selection. The other thing we hypothesized, and we initially started collecting data on, well, we did collect data on, but it just didn't happen, was problem behavior. So surprisingly, we did not see hardly any problem behavior during wait periods to access stimuli. The only problem behavior we observed was with one participant, and it was just rough play with the toys during the access period. And this particular participant had a history of some inappropriate toy play, which didn't seem to be occurring to access the delayed reinforcer. It seemed to be automatically reinforcing or potentially to gain access to attention from the therapist or the experimenter.
Okay. Well, I guess that's good news.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, what did you find in terms of your results? And more specifically, I guess, what do you know now that you didn't know after completing the Nyquist et al. Study?
Sure. So for some kids, all of the items, regardless of preference, were effective for promoting self-control responding. There were 2 kids for which we saw these results. And these results were found when the toys were available for all choice options, at least in the initial evaluation phase for these 2 kiddos. For the other 3, the effects of providing toys during the delay was shown only when the toys were restricted in the other choice options. That means only when they were delivered for the large delayed choice option. And the most consistent self-control responding was found for 2 of these 3 participants with high preferred toys were available. But sometimes for some of the participants, we did see self-control responding when lower preference items were available. So I think our results suggest that the quality of the stimuli is an important variable for some participants, and we should probably attempt to use high preferred stimuli or at least stimuli that have been shown to be reinforcers to bridge the delay. And what this means is it's probably unlikely that you can give a child anything during the delay to promote self-control or waiting. So you probably can't give the child cocktail onions to eat or a sock to play with. I think this was probably also the case for our participants in which low preferred items were also effective for promoting self-control. Even though they were lower preferred in the hierarchy, they still could have been reinforcers, and this has actually been shown in a lot of previous research studies. I think our data also suggests the potential importance of restricting access to preferred stimuli. So if they're going to be effective to promote self-control or waiting for items or activities, then those items probably shouldn't be provided non-contingently or a lot throughout the day.
Okay, excellent. Given those results now, do you think they tell us anything important that is contrary to either widely held beliefs or to results from other kinds of studies, such as the marshmallow tests?
Sure, I do actually. I think in addition to the potential procedural issues I discussed above with the marshmallow test studies, the same toy was provided for all kids, and it's unclear whether the toy in those studies needed to be preferred. I believe they used a slinky in that study. And our results with the individual participants suggest different effects for different individuals. But in general, they suggest that for most participants, the toy should be a reinforcer. That the interaction data suggested that the individuals interacted with it at high levels, suggesting that it was a highly preferred or reinforcing item, and that they should be relatively novel. So our results with individual participants suggested different effects for different individuals, but In general, they suggest that for most participants, the toy provided should be a reinforcer. So our interaction data suggested they interacted with it at a high level, suggesting that it was a reinforcer, and that it was relatively novel, or an item that they don't have regular access to, which also might have been the case with the Slinky and Shell study, given that time period.
Yes, right. Okay. What do you see as the practical implications of this research?
Yeah, I definitely think additional clinical studies should be done with respect to these findings and other findings on self-control. So, applying these interventions to more real-world context. But I think, practically speaking, as much as I can talk to that, our data suggests that if individuals have a difficult time waiting for things, that caregivers should try to find something their child really likes, restrict access to it, and only provide it during times in which they have to wait. I think, just as a side note, if we can focus on promoting self-control in preschool environments, as correlational studies have suggested, this might influence their future academic and social behavior in a positive way. Several papers by Michelle and other authors have suggested that self-control in early years is associated with higher levels of academic performance, reasoning skills, concern for others, which are important outcomes.
Yeah, excellent. So, practically, I guess, or not practically, what are the most important things you learned from this particular study?
Well, I think we learned a lot about methodology. I know I did, and I think Jessica Juanico and her colleagues would say the same. It's difficult to control for all the potential variables in this type of study that could influence your outcomes. So we learned a lot about methodology, I think, and analysis. But with respect to our outcomes, I think two things sort of stood out to us. One thing that's just briefly mentioned in the participant section is that of the 13 total original participants, 8 were not included in the study because they showed self-control responding in the delay assessment, meaning that they chose to wait for 3 minutes without any intervention. And this was actually surprising to us for these young kids. So I think it'd be interesting to see how long they actually might wait, which might be an area for future research. But I think the second thing that I think is important that was shown in the Nyquist and more specifically in Jessica's study is the potential importance of restricting access to the items that will then be used to bridge the delay to the reinforcer.
Excellent, thank you. It seems a very reasonable last question, I guess, to ask is that do you have any immediate plans for extending this particular line of research, and if you do, in what way?
We do. We continue to talk in my lab about replicating some of our outcomes within the context of the preschool classroom. So, can we teach a child to go and access other items or activities or interactions that are preferred when access to requested items and activities are not available? So that's an obvious extension, and given that we have access to preschool classrooms, that we would like to do. What wasn't included in Jessica's published manuscript was that for one of the participants, we found that we were able to quickly further increase the delay period to 10 minutes with both moderate and high preferred toys. So replicating and extending this with additional participants to see if it helps to promote rapid increase in the delay period, I think would be really cool. And then, the final thing that I've been stewing over but haven't really thought much about how to do the study is, given my interest also in condition reinforcement, the results of the Nyquist study showed that the brief rules and the countdown timer were ineffective for increasing self-control in the absence of delay fading. But several studies have shown when used in conjunction with delay fading, so for example, Vollmer has a study in conjunction with delay fading showing that rules or a countdown timer can be effective. And so I'm interested in comparing the two, comparing those procedures with and without delay fading, because they become these signals, brief rules, or the countdown timer become condition reinforcers. So when delay fading is used, the delay is initially very short. So these signals, the rules or the countdown timer, may actually initially be discriminative for short delays to the reinforcer, which then make them condition reinforcers. So they may be more effective under delay fading procedures because they were initially associated with more immediate delivery of the reinforcer. Sorry if that was convoluted, but I'm interested in seeing, with delay fading, are these signal procedures more effective, and might it be because they become condition reinforcers?
Excellent. So I guess we'll be looking forward to some more research along those lines. I think this was a great interview. I want to thank you again for agreeing to participate, and I hope it wasn't too painful for you.
Definitely not. Thanks a lot for asking me. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks so much. The music featured in this podcast is titled Pangea and is courtesy of Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com.